Today I'm going to be talking about 3 guidelines that I like to try to follow when I'm doing compression. And these guidelines help make sure that the end result of my compression is better than the end result without there being any compression. So meaning I do more good than harm as opposed to the other way of doing more harm than good, which can happen a lot of times, specifically because compression is very confusing. And especially in the beginning, it's super confusing. So if you try to follow these 3 guidelines, I promise you, you will get better compression results. Hey, my name is Chasky Efra from Y&I Recording Academy. Welcome if you haven't been around here, and welcome back if you have. So glad to have everyone here. So the first guideline that I like to try to follow when I'm applying compression is to clip gain my tracks. What does that mean? So we all know that compression basically makes, the louder parts quieter and the quieter parts louder with the makeup gain and the threshold and all that. It makes for a more of a consistent level. Specifically, I'm talking about vocals. A lot of times we're just trying to get it to be a little bit more consistent. So sometimes if your signal is too inconsistent, the compressor will be working harder than it should be. So let's say the quietest part of your signal is here and the loudest part of your signal is here. The compressor will have to work this amount to make them meet in the middle. It's a very simple, very, very simplified explanation. But if the quietest part of your signal is here and the loudest part of your signal is here, then the compressor won't have to work as hard to get them to meet in the middle. So that's just an example of what I mean. So what I mean is clip gain the tracks, the clips, before it actually gets into your compressor. Now let me show you what this looks like. So I have my clip gain lines on in Pro Tools, so I can quickly select the track, select the clip, break it, and then edit that clip gain line independently from the other clip gains. And this clip gain line means how much gain does the clip have, and the clip happens before the compressor. So I'll go through it and I'll eyeball it and I'll listen to it using my eyes and ears and make sure that everything's in like a similar ballpark. Don't get too crazy. But for example, this part that I just broke before, I know it's a little bit quieter than the rest, so I'll bring it up dB or 2. Maybe this starting phrase can be a bit louder, so just break it right there and bring this up. We'll bring up this whole section. We'll bring down the end part of this section, and you see here there is another phrase that's a little bit too loud. These are too quiet right here. So you see, I'm just going through and I'm making sure that my clip gain is just all the clips are in a similar ballpark. This way, when I get to the compressing part of things, the compressor won't have to work as hard, and I'll get a more of a natural compression sound, and I'll have more control over my compressor. Now, when you are doing clip gaining, make sure you are applying fades to your clips so you don't have any clicks and pops. I like to do Command F and do a certain amount of milliseconds, and I'll just automatically do it for me. So that is the first guideline that I like to adhere to, is to clip gain your tracks first, because then you will end up with a more of a consistent level to start with, and the compressor won't have to do as much. You'll have more control over your compressor and it will sound more natural. The next guideline I like to adhere to is to pay attention to the context. What does this vocal need? Because a lot of people get misguided when they're like, oh, that vocal's too compressed, it's overcompressed, or like that vocal, I don't really hear much compression, I need to hear more compression. So all of this is very relative to the vocal and the song, so very much pay attention to. If you have a very like pop song, very modern song with a heavy singer, it could be compressing a lot. Getting a lot of gain reduction will actually be in your favor, even though it's technically over-compressed. I wouldn't even call it over-compressed because it just sounds good that way. The same thing goes the other way. If it's in a slower, lighter song with a light vocalist, it's possible you don't need any compression at all. Likely you'll need a little bit, but pay attention to the context. Compression is definitely not a one-size-fits-all. So pay attention to the context. Ask yourself, how much compression do I think that this vocal/song needs? And then go ahead and apply it that way. If you don't do this, you'll just end up, applying the same settings of compression all across the board, and that's definitely not going to give you the best results. So that's the second guideline I like to adhere to. The third guideline I like to adhere to is always to make up the gain that you lost. So we know that a compressor, if my vocals here, the quietest part of my vocal and the loudest part of my vocal is here, then really all the compressor does is bring down the louder parts. It doesn't do anything to the quieter parts, and now it ends up being that I have a quieter signal, okay? So I have to make up the gain a little bit so I get into that same like zone that I was in before I had compressor. So always make up your gain that you lost. And the reason for this is because if you don't make up your gain that you lost, you'll have a very hard time A-Bing the compressor before and after, and it's possible the one before will sound better because it's louder. Louder always sounds better. So to avoid this, make sure that you're making up the gain. Don't make up too much gain. I'll maybe go into in a second. I'll tell you exactly a good guideline of how to make up gain. I'll show you in the Pro Tools, but don't make up too much gain. Make up the amount of gain that you've lost, the amount of average volume that you lost. Try to make up that gain, because then you'll be able to A/B the performance with compression and without compression, and that is really the best thing to do, because if you can A/B the performance with compression, without compression properly, then you can properly make a decision if this compression helped or this compression didn't help, did more than harm than good. So in order to determine that it did more good than harm, we have to make sure that our A/Bing reference is good. So always make up the gain that you've lost. What's a good guideline? What's a good, like, not rule, but like what's a good guideline, I guess, for making up a gain that you lost? So I would say that if, let's say you're getting a gain reduction, let's see what we're getting over here. We'll set up a compressor very simply.
Eyes of hatred full of harm, numbers burnt into his arm.
So I'm getting between 3 and 6 dB of compression. So since I'm getting more like between 3 and 6, I'm going to look at it as if I'm getting like 5 dBs of gain reduction. And with this, I'm basically going to make up a little bit more than half of that. So you don't want to make up the entire thing, because then we're not back to square one, but then it will be louder than the average volume of before. You want to make up like 3/4, about a half or 3/4, and of course use your ears. So I'm going to be making up, let's say I'm going to start with 2.5 dB, and I'll bypass and unbypass to make sure that my volumes are the same.
Eyes of hatred full of harm, numbers burnt into his arm.
Still a little bit quiet for me, so maybe I'll give it another dB. Notice how I'm not actually going up to 5, because that will make it too loud. But I'm doing between half and 3/4. If you need to go a little bit above this, again, use your ears. Be honest with yourself when you're listening to it.
Eyes of hatred full of harm, numbers burnt into his arm.
So I think that's a good amount of makeup gain for me. So that's the third guideline that I would try to follow. Just always make up the gain, because then you'll be in a good place to judge if the compressor made a good impact on your performance or a not such a good impact on your performance. So I hope this video helps you get more consistent sounding results and better sounding results from every time you're doing compression. Just every time you're doing compression, just ask yourself these 3 questions. Are you clip gaining, right? Am I making sure that the compressor is not working as hard as it should be? And am I paying attention to the context? Meaning, does this need a lot of compression, little compression, no compression? And thirdly, am I making up the gain? And I promise you, if you ask these 3 questions to yourself and answer them correctly, you will end up getting a much better result from your compressor and a more consistent result, and you'll be able to do this quicker because you have more of guidelines to follow. So I hope that helped you out. Listen, if you are looking to start a home studio, or you're looking to upgrade your home studio and you're not sure what to buy, I got you covered. I put it together in an entire PDF. It's called my Home Studio Gear Guide, and it's got links to every product, and it even has different budgets. So if whatever budget you're in, it will definitely cover you. So, and it's free to download. So go ahead and download it in the description below. And until next time.